Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, welcome back to The Issue Is.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
And by the way, we love your desk.
Thank you very much. I'm getting a lot of feedback on my desk these days.
All right. Let's talk about one of the big stories of the week, which is President Trump saying he wants the economy back open and basically giving the governors the green light to do things the way they want to do them. Gavin Newsom says he likes the broad strokes of what the president's saying. What say you?
Well, initially the president said that he alone was going to decide to reopen the country whenever he deemed it fit. But he's, I think, had to acknowledge the reality that, no, the governors are going to make these decisions on the basis of what's best for the people in their state. And you're already seeing governors band together with other governors in the region to try to work collectively because, of course, the virus doesn't stop at state borders. But they want to make sure, the governors want to make sure, and I think this makes all the sense in the world, that they are ready before they talk about reopening, that they have all the testing kits and the reagents and the swabs and the protective gear that they need to be able to identify where the virus is. Is it picking up steam? Is it losing steam? They want to make sure that the hospitals and clinics are prepared and not overwhelmed. And so they need certain prerequisites in place before they can take steps to partially reopen different sectors of the economy. I think that makes all the sense in the world. This push to prematurely open, really on a day yesterday when we had the greatest number of coronavirus deaths, over 4,000 in a single day, doesn't make sense until we're ready and could lead to more misery for people.
One of the most, speaking of misery, the economy is a miserable situation right now. One of the things that you guys did in Congress was you passed this $350 billion for small business loans, which really has allowed some people to keep their employees employed. Now that's out of money, and there's a debate about what happens next. What do you say to people that are really desperate right now and that see this bickering in Congress and say, what's going on there?
Well, I've been on the phone with small businesses, with small nonprofits. They want to see this program continue, and I think on a bipartisan basis, so do the members of Congress. But they've identified a lot of problems with it. People, particularly customers of large banks that apply, that are told, don't call us, we'll call you, have no idea whether their application is moving forward or not moving forward. And it looks like the big banks are giving their favored customers the best treatment and leaving others behind. We want to make sure those problems are addressed. We also know that our states, our cities, and our hospitals are in crisis right now, and they need resources too. So we're hoping that we can get bipartisan agreement to do all of that right now, and then move to bigger relief items on the agenda down the road. But we need to get that additional help out to the hospitals and the cities and the states right now as well.
I mean, you're obviously not in session right now. You're in D.C. Most members are not in D.C. right now. Have you worked out a framework to potentially vote virtually or do virtual caucuses to actually make some of this legislation happen?
We have. In fact, we have had a conference call among the caucus on this yesterday. I need to be close by because I need to go into the Intelligence Committee from time to time, something I can't do at a distance to review classified information. But others should be able to vote more remotely and still participate. And we're exploring not remote voting yet, but rather being able to designate a proxy so that someone who is in ill health or very distant from the Capitol that doesn't want to or can't take the risk of getting on a plane right now because they're quarantined or for some other reason, they could say, I'm going to give my proxy to this member to vote for me. But it would be under very narrow circumstances. It would be not a broad delegation that says, for example, Adam Schiff could vote for me, but rather on this vote, this is how I want the vote conducted, and I'm going to authorize so-and-so to cast that vote for me. With the proper safeguards, that's what we're looking to put into place so that we can approve these packages quickly. Now, I should say this, Elex. There should be broad bipartisan agreement on adding more money to the small business program, making improvements in it, supporting our hospitals and clinics. And when we get to yes, I would hope that we can do that on unanimous consent so we don't even need to have this kind of proxy voting. But if necessary, if there's another Representative Massey, for example, that wants to hold up the works, we need to make provision for that.
One issue that may not have as much bipartisan agreement, but is certainly an interesting idea, is this Federal Paycheck Guarantee Act, which you are now supporting. Explain to folks how that would work and talk about if that has a chance of passing.
I've thought really for months now that the best approach to this economic problem that we have, this economic crisis, is not a quilt of different programs, a $500 billion fund for these industries or a different fund for smaller businesses and overwhelming our unemployment compensation system, but rather have the federal government, as the British government and the Swedish and Norwegian and other governments are doing, have the federal government guarantee a large percent of payroll, 80 or 90 or even 100% of payroll, until we get through this, so that workers don't get laid off. They don't have to go on unemployment. When the economy comes back, they don't have to start looking all over again for a job. Businesses don't have to close. And it's done fairly. Banks aren't giving preference to favored lucrative customers. The president's not giving preference to his pals or punishing his enemies in industry, but rather the payroll of each and every large and small business would be covered while we go through this to a certain percentage. To me, that's simpler, more equitable, and it can be done through the IRS more quickly than through the commercial banks and the SBA.
So how expensive is that, and are you seeing any Republican support for it?
There are different estimates depending on how generous you want to go in terms of what percentage of payroll. And there are a couple different proposals, one by my Democratic colleague, Pramila Jayapal, that I'm co-sponsoring, that would guarantee up to 100%. And another in the Senate by Republican Josh Hawley, very conservative, that would guarantee 80%. And I think somewhere in that range is appropriate. But depending on what range you use, the costs differ. It might be $150 billion a month. But frankly, the way we're going through the funds for the small business program, the amount we've allocated for large industry, we're going to go through that amount anyway. And it would be better, I think, to do it in a more equitable way and in a way that avoids people and small businesses and laying off large numbers of people.
I mean, that sounds good to a lot of folks, I'm sure, that are listening. Is there a real chance that this could pass?
There is a real chance. It's going to require, I think, a lot of groundswell of support for it. There is some question about whether the Republicans in Congress are going to go along with any new package after we provide an additional infusion to small businesses and we hope to states and cities and hospitals. But I think the reality is going to be that the crisis is going to continue for some time. There is going to be a call in the Congress to do more. And rather than do it in piecemeal fashion, I think we ought to embrace the broader vision and the simpler and more equitable vision that's laid out in these proposals.
This is hurting so many different businesses, including journalism. This week, we found out that the Glendale News Press, Burbank Leader, other small papers, I know in your district, are not going to continue anymore. We're seeing problems up and down the state for journalism at this moment. You think Congress might be able to get involved in this? How?
Well, it's a terrible tragedy, and we saw in L.A. What so many communities around the country are seeing. An announcement last night that the Glendale News Press, the Burbank Leader, and the Valley Sun, all L.A. Times community papers, are now closing their doors. These papers have been around in one form or another for decades, some for almost 100 years, and to see this kind of really important local journalism and interconnective tissue between our communities disappearing is deeply tragic. Now, some of these are small businesses. They're not owned by large papers, and they actually can participate in that SBA program that already exists. But, and this underscores one of the problems we've identified with the SBA program. Many of these small papers and other small organizations and nonprofits aren't getting the loans, and I think it's because they're not the bank's best customers. They're not the most lucrative customers. But that's not really what Congress had in mind, to let banks pick winners and losers among their customers. But nonetheless, this is a real tragedy, and the result will be local matters won't get the same coverage, local corruption won't get exposed, but also, that connectivity between people in a community, great, achievements in local sports and local philanthropy won't get reported. And that really is quite a shame, and we ought to explore what can be done about it.
On another front, in terms of the news this week, you officially endorsed Joe Biden. Surprising you didn't endorse President Trump. I know there was some suspense on who was going to be the one that you would endorse in that showdown. But Joe Biden is an old school political guy who loves shaking hands, who loves looking people in the eye, who likes human interaction in a way that few people do. And yet he's stuck at his place in Delaware, not able to interact with people right now. What's your advice to Joe Biden for sort of navigating this new world in terms of winning a campaign in such uncharted waters?
Well, it's a real challenge, I think, for elected officials at every level who can't get out and press the flesh and can't do big campaign events, can't even do small campaign events right now. And a lot of the campaigning is done virtually. It's done through video conferences. And that's what Joe Biden is doing. It's what he's going to have to continue to do. Likewise, the president can't go to those rallies that he loves so much and that are such a boost, I think, to his ego to hear those adoring crowds gather for him. But he's been able to use the White House as his campaign podium in a way that's difficult for candidates to emulate. But I guess my advice to Joe Biden and to other candidates running for office is use the tools that you have. We're all basically in the same position these days. And I think if your message is compelling, then it's compelling in a virtual format, just as it would be compelling in person. And we're all going to have to retool given the realities of social distancing.
I think your desk is more compelling than his bookcase. Let's figure that out. Let's talk for a moment. We always like to have a little fun on this show. Quarantine life, what it's like for you. And we spoke recently. You said you were not doing The Tiger King. You were doing old movies. Have you changed on that? And what are you watching these days?
Well, I just watched Diner, which was fantastic. I hadn't seen it in years. And so I'm continuing with the old movies. I'm also really jumping from show to show to see, which one will capture my attention. And I'm open to recommendations of your audience. But one thing I will tell you is my daughter gave me a haircut. You can be the judge of how she did. But if people look at my Instagram page, they'll see the video that she put together of it, which I thought was quite clever. But then she is my kid, and I think everything she does is very clever.
Very nicely done. I don't know, were you a band person back in school, in high school or middle school?
I played jazz saxophone and clarinet.
Okay,
but
I also played saxophone back in the day, and we like to feature different music on this show. So I want to show this video to you. It's from Miracosta High School in Manhattan Beach. Their band, they were all set to head to Washington D.C. to perform for leaders like you, but obviously they can't do that right now. So they made a video with 150 band members performing virtually. It's pretty awesome. Fantastic. A little Jackson 5. Let's listen. So bravo to those band kids.
Wow.
It's I Want You Back from Jackson 5. Congressman, we want you back in the studio sometime soon. But until that day.
I will see you on the other side of the curve.
Yeah, we'll see you on the other side of the curve. We appreciate you joining us. Nicely done again on the decorations, and enjoy those old movies. The hair looks nice.
Thank you.
Up next, Carla Marinucci of Politico breaks down what's next for California politics. Stay with us. More of The Issue Is after this.